What if I told you the American Civil War never actually ended in Arkansas? In 1874, a full decade after Appomattox, this state was still fighting its own bloody war with cannons in the streets of Little Rock and two men claiming to be governor. Over 200 would die in what historians call the Brooks-Baxter War, the most violent political crisis you've never heard of. This is how a stolen election nearly restarted the Civil War. The war for the governor's chair, shadows of Reconstruction in Arkansas. In the smoldering ashes of the Civil War, Arkansas found itself caught in a storm of bitter politics, broken loyalties, and dangerous ambition. The year was 1868, and under the weight of Northern oversight and Southern resistance, a new constitution was born, radical, revolutionary, and resented. It gave black men the vote, built schools for all races, and silenced the old Confederate voices that once ruled the land. But not everyone was ready for this new Arkansas. A fragile alliance of Unionists, freedmen, and carpetbaggers clashed with outraged Democrats who yearned for a return to white supremacy. The air was thick with distrust, and elections became battles. Some won with ballots, others with bullets. Fraud, fear, and fury simmered beneath the surface until finally, it boiled over into the Brooks-Baxter War. Two men, Joseph Brooks and Elisha Baxter, both claiming the governor's seat, both backed by armed militias. Streets turned to battlegrounds, and the Capitol trembled as brother turned on brother. What began as a fight for office became a fight for the soul of a state, one struggling to decide who would lead it and what kind of future it would dare to claim. Blood, ballots, and bitter ambitions, the prelude to the Brooks-Baxter War. The shadows of war had barely lifted when Arkansas found itself caught in a new kind of conflict. One not fought on battlefields, but in courthouses, ballots, and backroom betrayals. Powell Clayton, a young Union general turned Republican governor, rode a wave of controversy into office in 1868, his election marred by fraud, intimidation, and ballots that outnumbered the voters. The state was in chaos, its leadership a tangled knot with two governors drawing paychecks, and democracy hanging by a thread. Amid the turbulence, Joseph Brooks, a powerful voice for freedmen and radical reform, was cast aside by Clayton, an act that would turn allies into enemies. Meanwhile, the Ku Klux Klan rose from the ashes of the Confederacy, cloaked in hate and violence, murdering Congressman James Hines and wounding Brooks in a bloody ambush that shocked the nation. Martial law gripped 14 counties, and fear bled into every corner of the state. Clayton's desperate fight to suppress rebellion only deepened the divide, and when he canceled elections in violence-stricken counties, it sealed the perception of tyranny in Republican robes. Arkansas had rejoined the Union, but it was far from united. Underneath the formalities of statehood, a storm of vengeance, power lust, and betrayal brewed. It was only a matter of time before it exploded into the open war for Arkansas's soul, the Brooks-Baxter War. Debt, dreams, and deception. The high price of rebuilding Arkansas. When Governor Powell Clayton took the reins of a shattered Arkansas, he saw a future full of railroads, schools, and promise. But dreams don't come cheap. With coffers near empty and the state reeling from war, Clayton resorted to desperate measures. Raising taxes, printing near-worthless scrip, and issuing bonds, many of them for projects that never saw a shovel hit the ground. Roads were planned, then replanned, and some railways were built twice in different directions. The infamous Halford bonds, already declared illegal, were quietly swept into new funding schemes, sparking outrage across party lines. The people, struggling in post-war poverty, were furious at the tax hikes and inflation that followed. And scandals stained every step, like the slate meant for a penitentiary roof, which ended up atop a Republican official's private mansion. Even the state's ambitious leap into education and infrastructure, founding schools for the blind, the deaf, and the first public university, couldn't hide the ballooning debt. By the time Clayton left office, Arkansas had plunged from a surplus into a $5 million deficit. In chasing progress, the state had mortgaged its future and sowed the seeds of political chaos to come. The War of Shadows, minstrels, brindle tales, and the battle for Arkansas. It was less a war of guns than a war of power, pride, and political theater. The Brooks-Baxter War was born in whispers and betrayal, not cannon fire. In the aftermath of the Civil War, Arkansas became a stage for two rival Republican factions: the flashy, northern-born minstrels and the fiery, populist Brindletails, led by a preacher-turned-politician named Joseph Brooks. At the heart of the storm was Governor Powell Clayton, whose iron grip and radical reforms split his own party in two. Bitter feuds, backroom deals, and cries of corruption tore through the state as both sides hurled accusations, rigged elections, and launched impeachment attempts like volleys in battle. In a state still bleeding from war, old wounds reopened. Freedmen's rights clashed with white resentment. Dreams of reform collided with economic despair, and ambition twisted into vendetta. The conflict reached absurd heights. Office doors nailed shut, titles exchanged like bribes, and enemies sent to Washington just to get them out of the way. In the end, no side claimed true victory, but the chaos left Arkansas with a shattered government, a shaken people, and a deep scar that pulsed with the lingering heat of Civil War. A deal in the shadows, Brooks, Baxter, and the bargain that shook Arkansas. In a state already boiling with political betrayal, the stage was set for a showdown that blurred the lines between principle and ambition. The Brindletails, led by the firebrand preacher Joseph Brooks, a man loved by freedmen but loathed by nearly everyone else, threw their hopes behind his vision of civil rights and Confederate forgiveness. Across the divide, the minstrels played a shrewder hand, nominating Elisha Baxter, a quiet Unionist with a Confederate past and just enough homegrown roots to soothe uneasy Democrats. But behind the curtains, darker deals were being struck. Democrats, once bitter enemies, embraced Brooks not for love, but for leverage. Promises were whispered, courtrooms manipulated, and justice twisted to favor fugitives tied to murder and the Ku Klux Klan. It wasn't just an election. It was a chess match where every move masked a motive, every alliance was an echo of war, and the people of Arkansas watched as power changed hands not through the will of the people, but through shadowy compromises and desperate ambition. The Brooks-Baxter War was no longer just a clash of ideologies. It was a haunting testament to how far men would go when truth, trust, and justice were the stakes. The phantom victory, when truth was lost at the ballot box. Imagine waking up in a land where no one truly knew who had won the vote, or if the vote even mattered at all. That was Arkansas in 1872, where confusion reigned and suspicion hung thick in the air like a southern summer fog. Joseph Brooks, the fiery preacher backed by Democrats, squared off against Elisha Baxter, a quiet but calculating former Union colonel. But the election wasn't just a contest between men. It was a whirlwind of shifting alliances, ghost votes, and whispered fraud. Names vanished from rolls, strangers voted multiple times, and entire precincts seemed to appear from nowhere. Newspapers cried foul daily, yet the streets remained eerily calm. First the Gazette claimed Brooks had won, then suddenly Baxter emerged victorious by a razor-thin 3,000 votes. The General Assembly sealed it, swearing Baxter in with pomp and legality. But behind the ceremonies, the bitterness brewed. Brooks's supporters screamed betrayal, crying out that the election had been stolen in plain sight. Yet for most Arkansans, weary of chaos, acceptance came quicker than outrage. It wasn't just a stolen seat. It was a stolen truth, and the shadows it cast would stretch far beyond the ballot boxes of Little Rock. Brooks's last stand, a battle for justice beyond the courtroom. After the chaos of the 1872 election, Joseph Brooks refused to let the scandal die quietly. The fight for the governorship spilled into courtrooms, with Brooks determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. His first legal move was against the system itself. His ally, Judge William M. Harrison, filed a suit in federal court, claiming the election had been fraudulent. But the court, led by Judge H.C. Caldwell, swiftly dismissed the case, declaring the federal system had no jurisdiction. Undeterred, Brooks pressed on, demanding a recount from the General Assembly, only to be rebuffed by a 63-9 vote. Even the Arkansas Supreme Court shut its doors, insisting the General Assembly was the only body that could resolve such a dispute. As his legal options dwindled, Brooks launched a final desperate bid, suing Baxter in Pulaski County Court, invoking an old Arkansas law about usurpation of office. But the battle was not just in the courts. it reached the highest levels of government. Fearing unrest, Baxter even appealed to President Grant for federal intervention, but was denied. With each failed attempt, Brooks's resolve only grew stronger. His fight for justice had become a symbol of defiance against an unjust system, a last stand for the truth he believed had been buried beneath the weight of corruption. The shifting sands of power, a governor betrayed. Amidst the turbulence of Arkansas's post-Civil War politics, the lines between loyalty and betrayal blurred when Governor Elisha Baxter, once a beacon for the minstrels, began to chart his own course. In a year of political maneuvering, Baxter dismantled the very structures that had brought him to power, reenfranchising ex-Confederates and appointing honest men to his election commission. His vetoes and moderate stance soon alienated his former allies, most notably Powell Clayton, who accused him of secretly plotting with Democrats and undermining the Republican cause. As support shifted, a dramatic turn unfolded in the courtroom. A late legal move saw Brooks, once the defeated challenger, being sworn in as governor under dubious circumstances, without Baxter's knowledge or consent. A judge, acting on a whim, handed Brooks the office in a decision that would further deepen the state's political rift. Arkansas, caught in the throes of betrayal and political chaos, saw its future shrouded in uncertainty, as two men, once allies, now stood on opposite sides of the same bitter war for control. The battle for the capital, a state on the brink of chaos. The struggle for control of Arkansas reached its dramatic peak when Joseph Brooks, with the help of General Robert F. Catterson and his militia, stormed the state capitol in Little Rock with barely a whisper of resistance. By the afternoon, Brooks' men had seized the Capitol building, the state arsenal, and the state seal, turning the once secure seat of government into an armed stronghold. The desperate clash of loyalties saw Brooks proclaiming himself the legitimate governor, his supporters flooding telegrams to President Ulysses S. Grant, urging federal recognition. Meanwhile, Governor Baxter, outnumbered and cornered, was forced to retreat to the Anthony House, where he rallied his remaining supporters and declared martial law. With tensions at a boiling point, Baxter called upon the federal government to restore his authority, while Brooks prepared for a showdown. The battle escalated with the arrival of Hercules King Cannon White, who led a militia of African-American troops to bolster Baxter's cause. But even as skirmishes broke out, a tragic loss of life made clear that Arkansas was teetering on the edge of full-scale civil war, with the fate of the state hanging in the balance. The battle for Little Rock, the deadly showdown. Little Rock became a deadly stage for the final chapter of the Brooks-Baxter War, where two militias, commanded by ex-Confederates, clashed with the city itself as the battleground. On one side, Brooks' forces, freedmen who saw their Republican allies as liberators, marched, determined to claim the governor's seat. On the other, Baxter's growing army of white Democrats fortified the Anthony House and its surrounding streets, preparing for inevitable conflict. The city buzzed with tension as cannon fire echoed across the streets, and artillery like the Lady Baxter, a relic of the past, was reactivated in an effort to keep Brooks' supply lines at bay. As skirmishes raged, including a bloody naval confrontation on the Arkansas River, casualties piled up, marking the brutal reality of the battle. The Civil War's ghosts haunted the fighting, with racial and political tensions deepening the wounds. After several clashes, both sides left bloodied, with Brooks suffering severe losses and Baxter securing a temporary victory. But in the end, the battle was not just for control of a state. It was a fight for the future, for the direction Arkansas would take in a post-war world, where loyalties and alliances were forever fractured. The fall of Brooks, a governor's struggle for survival. As the political tide shifted, Joseph Brooks found himself on the losing side of a battle he could no longer win. Amid mounting pressure and betrayal, his claim to the Arkansas governorship was increasingly unsupported. On May 3rd, a bold move by Baxter's supporters, hijacking a train and kidnapping two federal judges, seemed to give Baxter the upper hand. But the act was met with swift federal intervention. Tensions escalated in Washington as President Grant, despite his general reluctance to meddle in Southern affairs, was forced to address the volatile situation. With both Baxter and Brooks scrambling for Washington's favor, Grant's support leaned toward Baxter, condemning Brooks' actions as unlawful. By May 19, after a series of court rulings and legislative moves, Brooks' forces had to evacuate the capital, and General Newton's troops marched in to reestablish Baxter's control. Brooks, once supported by the people, now found himself a mere shadow of his ambition as federal and state forces rallied behind Baxter. The struggle that had raged for weeks ended with the unmistakable defeat of Brooks, his dream of power slipping away into the shadows of Arkansas's tumultuous history. The Poland Committee, the struggle for legitimacy in Arkansas. In the aftermath of the Brooks-Baxter War, the U.S. House of Representatives formed the Poland Committee to probe the legitimacy of Arkansas's government. Chaired by Representative Luke P. Poland of Vermont, the committee was tasked with determining if Arkansas's government met the standards of a republican system that the U.S. should recognize. The majority report, submitted in 1875, concluded that despite some irregularities, the 1874 state constitution aligned with Republican principles and had the support of most Arkansas residents. This cleared the way for Governor Augustus Garland's legitimacy, deeming Brooks's earlier claims invalid. However, a dissenting minority report, backed by Illinois Congressman Jasper D. Ward, suggested that Brooks should be reinstated as governor, a position supported by President Ulysses S. Grant. Despite Grant's endorsement of Brooks, the majority report prevailed in the House, effectively opposing federal intervention and solidifying Garland's hold on power, signaling the end of Brooks's political ambitions. The aftermath, a shattered Arkansas and the rise of Democrats. In the wake of the Brooks-Baxter War, Arkansas struggled to recover from the political chaos that had gripped it. By June 1874, Powell Clayton, once a central figure in the state's Republican faction, admitted he could no longer control the situation, offering to enter negotiations to avoid further persecution. In retaliation, Democrats launched a campaign of retribution, impeaching key figures, including Supreme Court Justice John McClure. By September 1874, a new constitution was adopted, ratified through an election marred by violence and voter suppression, particularly against the black population. Despite Republican protests, the new constitution passed, cementing Democratic control. Augustus H. Garland was sworn in as governor in November, and Baxter, having served only 2 years, left office. The Democrats solidified their power, and for nearly 90 years, no Republican would hold the governor's seat again, until Winthrop Rockefeller's election in 1966, marking the end of an era of segregation-driven politics in Arkansas. So, was this America's first coup attempt? Should Brooks or Baxter have won? Debate below. If you're shocked this isn't taught in schools, smash like and subscribe. We've got more forgotten American wars coming soon. Next week, the Mormon War / Whiskey Rebellion. Hit the bell on History Love so you don't miss it.